Hi everyone, and welcome to this first YouTube video on my channel. My name is Angie, I'm a graphic designer. I've been designing for over 15 years now. I specialize in logo design, but also in the creation of vector illustrations. Over the last year, I've had a couple of questions from different kind of people regarding how it is that I do what I do and what is necessary in the creative process. So today I've compiled together for you this little tutorial video where I show you step by step the different parts of my creative process. I hope to give you some insights. And of course, if you have any questions, comments, or anything else, feel free to get in touch, comment below, and I will gladly answer you. Thank you. When you start working on a project, the first step is always having an idea. So when I get that first idea, what I will usually do is I will start gathering material regarding that specific idea, documentation. I'm going to go, for instance, here and there. I'm going to read article about something so I understand better how it works. As my style is also quite realistic when I draw, I try to make a first sketch where I'm really going to gather the basic of the shape. So proportions are also something that's important, but in my case, a study also of lights and shadows. The idea being that depending on where the sun or the moon is in the sky, your subject is not going to be the same. So you need to think about these kind of little details, and that's the whole point of making a study. So that when I start working, I already have some basics on my canvas. As you're going to see in a sec, it's not a very elaborate sketch. The idea here is simply to be able to get a feel of what I'm going to be drawing and already have some correct proportions. So now that we're all ready, we're going to go ahead and create a new Illustrator document. So into a new window in Adobe Illustrator, I'm going to give my file a name. I'm going to check that it has the right size, the right settings, the right color profile, and I will create. One of my first steps is also a lot of the time to include a little documentation along to the side of my document. In this case, I will be drawing an airport floor. So as I have no knowledge of lights and how they work, I thought it might have been nice to have something that looks a little realistic. So I went ahead and I did some research to see how the lights are usually placed in this kind of environment. I'm going to also pull one or two pictures just for inspiration when I draw. And once I will be ready with that, I'm going to import the paper art I made onto my artboard. I'm going to be using it as a guide to make my drawing. So first I'm going to fit it onto the artboard so it's at a rather good dimension to draw. And as I will be using symmetry, of course, I'm going to pull a few guides here and there. Usually I like to put them at the center of my artboard. So anything that needs to be centered either horizontally or vertically can actually be nicely done. Also, something that's really important to me is to save regular copies of my work. I can't say it enough, please guys, girls, really save your work as you go along, because sometimes just forgetting about it can cost you a lot of time, energy, stress, whatever. Once I'm done with all my documentation, I'm also going to lock the layer where all of that information is, and I will create other layers where I will make the actual drawing. So now off to the actual creative process. Here I've sped up the video a little just to make sure I was able to show you the whole workflow, the whole process. So I'm going to be using the image I created earlier as a reference. Now the image is sometimes a rough sketch, so that's where the documentation comes in handy. I tend to use the pen tool, but also some geometric shapes. That way I know the artwork is really perfect in the way it's drawn. I'm not afraid also to zoom in really big sometimes to get tiny things perfect. At this point I also created a copy of my plane. The reason behind this is I'll be able to easily revert to a simpler version if I decide to make more changes to the artwork I have so far and it doesn't turn out. So I strongly recommend that you make backup copies of what you're drawing every now and then. That way you can always go back to an earlier version, and that's a real time saver. Always handy to have. Here, as you can see, I've also drawn guides, and I've used them to create a perspective. The idea is going to be drawing the lights, and to do it in a realistic fashion. Don't be afraid to make groups of objects and also to use these objects together. Here in it, for instance, it's making it a lot easier. It's becoming a real time saver. I made a first batch of light, and then all I have to do to create the next one is duplicate it, stick to the perspective grid I made earlier, and just make the adjustments. Here I've also imported a couple of little dingbats from another file. The idea behind this is, of course, to create a graphic language that's the same throughout my artwork. And as you can see, when it comes to colors or even gradients, I usually work with CMYK. The reason behind this is I'm initially a pre-press artist. I used to blend my own color together also. So working in this fashion makes it a lot easier for me to really get the colors I want. A precious trick is also to never use pure black, because the black you will usually get is something that doesn't really have a lot of depth. So what I strongly recommend in using the CMYK mode is to add some other colors, some supporting colors into your black. That way you're really going to get a nice depth effect out of it. And it's not going to look like it's been washed off or something like that. Here I'm also trying some little light effects to see how it will turn out on my final art. And as you can see, I also work a lot with radius corners. I really like to smoothen them. I like stuff that's not too sharp, that's a little gentler. Then, of course, once I'm happy with everything I've drawn, I can start throwing in a little bit of color, see if a little effect here or there is something that could work, and make the adjustments. Now off to the corrections of the work. I also sped the process a little up so it doesn't take forever to show you. Something that you probably will not read in a lot of places is that when you have your nose on your work for hours at a time, and goodness gracious, I do spend a lot of time drawing, sometimes hours and hours and hours on a single piece. So it's really important at some point to also stand a little back from your work. Otherwise, you're going to be biased, and so biased, you're not going to see some of your own flows, some of the flows of your own work. So a little break is always nice. You know, go do something else for a while and come back to it. Or something that's also even better is to simply sleep on it. Then you can come back fresh to your work and see little things, little details that you were so caught up in other things and did not see before. And then you can make better decisions when it comes to visual stuff. So now here I'm making the final adjustments to my artwork. I'm trying to see how colors go together. Since I'm also working with some gradients and I tend to have a very limited color palette, what you will see is that a gradient is used here but is also used in other places. So while I do that, I also need to make sure that my drawing remains legible. So I'm making some little attempts here. I'm fiddling around to see what works best. And of course the tricky part is really the light here on the plane. If you check some of the documentation, you usually see that the cockpit kind of reflects the ambient light. So in this case it would be the night sky, the sunset light. So I'm trying to get the effect tip-top here. Don't be afraid to duplicate your work, to also make attempts while making modifications here and there. And if really you need it, there's no shame in doing that. Sometimes you're a little split between, okay, I like this or I don't. So don't be afraid to turn out to outside people for validation. Given, of course, that these people have some good taste in design and in prints. And now the last part, it's really about fine-tuning your work and what you're going to be using it for. So once you're ready with everything, make sure that the color profile of the document itself is actually correct. Either RGB or CMYK, of course, depending on what you will be doing in the end. Make sure the document color mode is also correct. But also don't forget to check your raster settings, because there's nothing more horrible than put in a lot of effort into work and then end up with something mediocre. So really important to check all of that. Then you can, of course, export your artwork. And what I would strongly recommend once you have saved your work is simply to adjust some of your colors. The reason I recommend you to do that is because what I notice across different platforms, I'm thinking Dribbble, Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and other places, a lot of the time, the color is not going to be very consistent across all these platforms. I'm not sure why, or if there's a special module with a color that they're using to display stuff. But I want my work to be polyvalent nonetheless, for it to work across all platforms. So a lot of the time, I'm just going to make tiny adjustments when it comes to lights, mostly, but also contrast. Doing that really makes your image a lot more crisp, a lot better in quality. And that's also going to ensure that what you get across all the different platforms is more consistent, which I think is really important if you want to expose your work online. Save the document again, compress it if you can, of course. Well, I do hope that I have been able to share valuable and interesting information with you. I also hope I have been able to inspire you somehow. Of course, if you have any comments or questions, feel free to drop them below. I will gladly answer. And if you would like to see more of these kinds of videos, if you would like to support my channel, you can like, subscribe, share, and of course you can follow me on social media. Bye for now.